Hey there, friends. In this video, I am going to give you an overview of my instructions for a theological integration paper. Now, you may be enrolled in some course with me where that's called a final position paper or a research paper. It doesn't matter what the title is. These are instructions for how to write a theological integration paper. If there are differences in what I cover here versus your syllabus, always go off the syllabus that you've been given. And also, these instructions will apply the same as for undergrad as to grad students, but there will be differences in terms of length and number of sources expected for grad students that would be higher than undergrad. So if you're an undergrad, make sure you go off your syllabus. If you're a grad, go off your instructions that I've given you. All right, without further ado, a theological integration paper is an assignment where you are asked to write a paper in which you give an argument for a position on a topic that we cover in your course. So if you're in a theology course and you're looking at a couple of different doctrines, say the doctrine of God, you would pick a topic related to doctrine of God in which you argue for a position that's contested. So, for example, in the doctrine of God, we look at doctrine of God's sovereignty, and then within that, we try and understand God's sovereignty in relation to human free will. If you're going to write a paper over that topic, you would articulate a thesis in which you say, my position on God's sovereignty in relation to human free will is ... And then the rest of the paper is you giving reasons why someone should accept your position in contrast to others. So the goal of this paper is not to write a paper explaining all the details regarding an issue or a doctrine. I want you to specifically argue for a position in this paper. And so central to that is going to be having a clearly articulated thesis. I'll talk about that in a minute when I get to the introduction section. But a couple of housekeeping things regarding the format. Always use Turabian formatting for your style for the paper, including your footnotes, your bibliography. I always want 12-point Times New Roman font. If you're using a Mac, make sure that you turn it in via Microsoft Word or a PDF. I can't open Pages documents, so 12-point Times New Roman font, 1-inch margins. You need to have a title page, and you also need to have page numbers beginning on the first page of the text of your paper, not on your title page. You'll have a bibliography where you cite your sources, and you need to have, at the end of each citation, you need to have in parentheses the number of pages from that source that you read. This is not according to Turabian, this is something extra, so just include at the end of each citation of your sources, I read 16 pages from this article, or I read 150 pages from this book. And then at the end of your bibliography, you're going to total all of those up and have a total amount at the very bottom of your bibliography, maybe underline or put it in bold or something so I can see. The expectation is for grad students, you need to have at least 500 pages read for this paper of research. That doesn't include your primary textbooks for your course. That needs to be in addition to those. But 500 pages for graduate students. And then for undergrad students, I want you to do 300 pages of research. So your total pages read in your bibliography needs to add up to at least 300 pages. A couple of other things. You need to do a topic approval sheet for this paper. In your course, I'll have posted a template topic approval sheet that's blank. It has a couple of things that you need to fill in there. One of which is your research question, your thesis. I have a separate video where I explain instructions for that. Everything that you do for the topic approval sheet will build and contribute to your argument in this paper. So if you get that done and you get a lot of good quality text into your topic approval sheet, and I get feedback on that, chances are you're going to do really well on this paper. So topic approval sheets are necessary. In your course, I'll have posted a template one, a sample, and then also a video explaining instructions for the topic approval sheet. If you don't turn in a topic approval sheet, you'll have points taken off your paper. For different courses, I take different amounts off, but know that that's a required element. You can't turn in a theological integration paper and get full marks if you don't also turn in a topic approval sheet. Now, I try and take all the guesswork out of what to include on the papers that you turn into me. So it's a little bit like painting by numbers. I've given you the sections and the section headings that I want you to include in your paper, and your job is to go through and fill in for each of those sections exactly what I'm looking for. The length for each section will vary depending on the instructions in your syllabus, but the elements will remain the same across the board with each course that I teach. So without further ado, let's dive into those. I want you to have section headings in your paper. Most of the time I want you to have these exact section headings, but for some of my courses I give you some leeway to customize those a little bit, though I want the same elements in each section. So you're going to have an intro, you're going to have a section on theological perspectives, your position that you argue, a section on objections to your position, and then finally an integration and conclusion section where you sum everything up and apply it to life and ministry. So what to include in each of these sections? In your intro, I want you to have several paragraphs where you introduce your topic, situate it within the conversation surrounding that. So if you're writing on God's sovereignty and human free will, you'd introduce what's at stake with God's sovereignty and if humans are free or not. Maybe frame the conversation a bit in terms of what various people believe, why this is important. But in the middle of your intro, this could be in the first paragraph or it could be in the second, I want you to have a very clear thesis. And your thesis needs to be something like this. In this paper, I will argue, or this paper will argue, depending on whether for different courses, I let you use first person language. But in any case, you need to have something that says, this paper argues, or the thesis of this paper is, ... And I want you to have a very clear statement of your position in relation to the topic that you're covering. So your thesis is different than your goal for the paper. Your goal for the paper may be to inform someone on this topic. That's a great goal, but it doesn't tell me what your position is. So your thesis should be what your position is in reference to people who disagree with you. So pretend that you are in a room having a conversation with somebody or a couple of people who all have different beliefs regarding this issue. Your thesis needs to be what you say to them that sets you apart from what their beliefs are. That'll be important when we get to section 2. But first section is an intro to the topic, and within that you need to have a very clear thesis statement. This could be 1 or 2 sentences, and it should get to the very essential elements of your position. The second section is theological perspectives. This is where you situate your thesis within the broader conversation or the broader discussion over that topic. So I want you to, once you've identified what your position is, I want you to be able to identify what at least 1 or 2 other differing positions are. So for instance, if we're talking about God's sovereignty and human free will, you may be arguing that God is fully sovereign, but that is not incompatible with humans being fully free. That's a typical Calvinist position. If you were going to pick a differing position or a theological perspective that argues against that, you would probably pick a classical Arminian position. And an open theist position. Those two disagree very strongly with the compatibilist Calvinist position. So you would say, in theological perspectives section, you would say there are 2 main positions that disagree with me, and I want you to explain what they believe in a paragraph or 2. I want also for you to quote directly from someone who holds to that position. So in your bibliography, I should be able to see that you've done research that shows that you can go straight from the horse's mouth. If you're going to write on God's sovereignty and human free will, I don't want you to open up Wayne Grudem's systematic theology and cite Grudem on what Arminians and open theists believe. I want you to go to Roger Olson, or someone else who actually holds to that belief. I want you to quote them directly. In the third section of your paper, you're going to give a full argument for your position. So this will be several paragraphs, at least, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, depending on the length of the paper. Things that you'll do are you'll argue from biblical evidence, maybe present some historical arguments. What are some people in history who've believed this and why? You can give theological arguments or philosophical arguments. Basically, I want you to give reasons why someone should accept your position. And you can use different avenues or different ways to argue that. The fourth section is anticipated objections. What are the weak points of your position? The people that you've identified in the theological perspective section, in section 2, what would they say against your argument if you were to present it to them? What would they say, what would you anticipate they would say are the weak points of your argument? And I want you to briefly respond to those criticisms. So say if you would, on the position of Calvinism versus Arminianism, you're arguing for a Calvinist perspective, you would say, Arminians argue, or Roger Olson argues against my position and says this, but that doesn't weaken my position for this reason or that reason. So I want you to briefly respond to some potential objections to your topic and to your thesis. Then finally, I want you to have a brief section on integration and conclusion. Why does this topic matter? Why does your thesis apply well, or how does your thesis apply to life and ministry? Make it practical. If I've given you instructions to make it personal in your syllabus, please do that. And I've given you some sample questions to ask yourself to help articulate that. So that's the paper. I've provided a rubric in your course to show you what I'll be grading you on. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or send me a message in the course. I'll be happy to answer that. I've also provided a sample paper. Usually the samples I provide are for graduate level work. So note that if you're in an undergrad section, it may be that the sample may be more lengthy and have more in-depth research than what's expected for you. So just note that, but the sample will help you see what I'm looking for. Again, shoot me a question if anything comes up. Thanks so much for your time.